When it comes to covert action in Iran, I am told by a former senior defense official, quote, I'm sure there's a finding out there that the president signed at a very high level. A former national security official, Javed Ali, he was a senior director in the White House's National Security Council. He also told me that it is safe to assume that covert action is quote unquote well underway in the country. There was a third person who also said definitely covert action right now. Now, we know that Trump vocally said that he had authorized covert action in Venezuela. So why might he not be doing it this time too? Well, I spoke to a person in the national security community who expressed how aghast they were at the fact that the president was being so open about covert action, specifically describing the fact that he authorized a drone strike at a facility in Venezuela. This person had talked about how this can undo some of the legal foundation for the covert action finding. This is what authorizes the covert action when the president gives this order. It has to stay covert. If you're talking about it, then why does it need to be covert? This person talks about how this could chip away at that. So that might be why we have heard less of the president describing certain activity in Iran. The real question here, though, is what did the president authorize? In conversation, there's a whole menu of options. It could be regime change, which could mean training opposition, arming opposition with weapons and equipment. It could also mean sabotaging some of the regime's facilities in a kinetic way, through cyber efforts. And then, of course, there are more non lethal options that have to do with psychological operations, trying to get past the Iranian regime's firewall to deliver messages to the protesters out on the streets, blasting propaganda, creating websites, all kinds of activity. What my understanding is right now is that what's likely high priority is Elon Musk's Starlink, because this is a form of satellite communication that does get around the Iranian regime's suppression. And there's also something called white SIMs. This is essentially a SIM card that you put into your cell phone, and it gives you the chance to have almost a burner phone. It connects to Starlink, so you can use your cell phone to continue texting, calling, pushing information out. And there could literally be a person on the ground who is just handing out these white SIMs to protesters in certain locations so that the messages can continue, the crowds can continue to be riled up and take to the streets. Now, I have heard, as you probably would also hear in mainstream media and newscasts, that military strikes are likely, that this is something that the president is considering. But I was told by that former senior defense official, quote, there's just not a lot in CENTCOM right now to do with that. Of course, this refers to Central Command, which is the area of responsibility for Iran. Quote, they don't like to leave stuff in CENTCOM. This person was talking specifically about the carrier USS Gerald Ford, which is now in the Caribbean region, which falls into the purview of Southern Command. There's also the two Pacific carriers who are in Indo-Pacific. So these are not immediately accessible, which limits the U.S. options for the moment. And the person estimated that it would take those two Pacific carriers about 3 weeks to arrive to the necessary area. Now, the person went on to say that the United States could, of course, turn to B-2 bombers, but that would require preparation and accompanying aircraft, fighter jets like F-22s or F-35s, jammers, tankers. It would require a lot more work. And the person just said that they weren't sure if there were resources to do that, and that we need to be prepared for an Iranian response. The Israelis and the United States, but mostly the Israelis, have severely weakened Iran in terms of its military defenses, but there still are ballistic missiles. We could also see joint operations with Israel. And this little section of an article from the Times of Israel kind of stood out to me. And take it with a grain of salt because the Iranians are not known for their truth telling. But when it comes to operations on the covert side, here is what has been reported. Quote, Iranian security forces claimed to have arrested what a state television report described as terrorist groups linked to Israel in the southeastern city of Zahedan. The report, without providing additional details, said the group entered through Iran's eastern borders and carried U.S.-made guns and explosives that the group had planned to use in assassinations and acts of sabotage. Now, if this comes from Iran, again, take it with a grain of salt. They love to blame Israel. They love to blame the U.S. Obviously, big propaganda machine. But Javed tells me that there have been some hints that the Israeli government is telling people, maybe go hit up some bomb shelters sometime soon. Another new facet that I wanted to talk about here, I'm told that the Trump administration is buying time, that it's not just making threats and, saying one thing one day and one thing the next day with our president, as we often see him do, an interesting tactic which keeps other leaders on their toes, but that this administration is also thinking about who could come next if this regime falls. And they're doing outreach. What I mean is that they're searching for alternative leaders beyond the mullahs, who, of course, are the religious elite who have control of the country. The threat is that the country could descend into a civil war, and this would be a real problem for the region, something that the Gulf states and the Turks are very much opposed to. So Team Trump is looking around to see if maybe there is a colonel in the IRGC who's disaffected, if there's some kind of person that they can work with in a sort of Delcy Rodriguez, Venezuela kind of way. Maybe you're sort of part of the old guard, but will you give us our way on oil and some of these other points? And let's just be clear, the Shah's son might be trying to encourage protests, might be visiting people in certain places, but it doesn't seem like he's seen as a real alternative right now. And let's also just keep in mind that the Shah himself was brutal and suppressive, and that was what led to the rise of this Islamic Republic. It is curious to note, though, that the IRGC intelligence organization released a statement on January 10th that says, quote, that it's, or this is not part of the quote, but it says that it's, quote, dealing with possible acts of abandonment. So, is there a layer that the Trump administration is thinking about when it comes to people who have defected, and would they be valuable? That former senior defense official that I had mentioned at the beginning told me that searching for an alternative leader is responsible. This is what the administration should be doing. Not surprising. But of course, this could be a very difficult task with the Iranians, and that the Shah's son is not the answer. Now, I've also confirmed what the Wall Street Journal had previously reported about military personnel being evacuated from the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. And we know that there are some 2,600 people who have been estimated to have been killed, another 18,000 arrested. The Iranians now saying that they will not execute protesters. Things have quieted down for the day, for the moment. But the reason this happened is the country is angry at the economic noose that comes from these sanctions, that is based on the regime's foreign policies, its attitude toward the United States, its isolation, the proxy groups. This is a generation that is tired. They are not the ones who wanted this, as we saw from the 1970s, the students who were out in the streets, who took over the U.S. Embassy. These are different times. So you can bet that the U.S. is taking advantage of it under the Trump administration. I'll see you again soon, guys. Thanks for watching.